Last week we talked about table manners, and we were specifically talking about our own table manners, what we learned growing up, as well as Jesus' table manners. So this week we find Jesus at table. So it was perfect scripture. So the reading comes from Luke chapter 12, verses 7 through 14. And I'll just read this here. It said, Jesus went on to tell a story to his guests gathered around a table. Noticing how each had tried to elbow into the place of honor, Jesus said, when someone invites you to dinner, don't take the place of honor. Somebody more important than you might have been invited by the host. Then he's going to come out and call in front of everybody, hey, you're in the wrong place. The place of honor belongs to this man, not you. Embarrassed, you'll have to take your place at the very last table, the only place left. When you're invited to dinner, go and sit at the last place. Then when the host comes, he may very well say, friend, come up to the front. That will give the dinner guests something to talk about. What I'm saying is, if you walk around all high and mighty, you're going to end up flat on your face. But if you're content to be simply yourself, I'm going to say that one again, but if you're content to be simply yourself, you'll become more than yourself. Then he turned to the host. The next time you put on a dinner, don't just invite your friends and family and rich neighbors, the kind of people who will return the favor. Invite some people who never get invited out, the misfits, the people from the wrong side of the tracks. You will be and you will experience a blessing. They won't be able to return the favor, but the favor will be returned. Oh, how it will be returned at the resurrection of God's people. The end of our reading. So as they get seated, I will just give some basics This comes from the National Institute of Health, the basics of autism spectrum disorder. And some of you may certainly know much, much more than I, certainly, and much, much more than I'm talking about. So we have some experts in the room, so you can access them later. But here's some basic information. Autism spectrum disorder is a neurological and developmental disorder that affects how people interact with others, communicate with others, learn, and behave. Although autism can be diagnosed at any age, it is described as a developmental disorder because symptoms generally appear in the first 2 years of life. According to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, DSM-5, a guide that healthcare providers use to diagnose disorders, people with ASD, autism spectrum disorder, often have, number one, difficulty with communication and interaction with other people. They have restricted interests and repetitive behavior, and they have symptoms that affect their ability to function in school, to function in work, and to function in other areas of life. So autism is known as a spectrum disorder because there is a wide variation in the type and severity of symptoms people with ASD experience. So people of all genders, races, ethnicities, and economic backgrounds can be diagnosed with ASD. Although ASD can be a lifelong disorder, treatments and services can improve a person's symptoms and daily function. So that's that piece. So I'm going to go over here and sit in the front seat and start by asking a question of Sarah. And it's a pretty personal question. So Sarah and I had a conversation. You'll get my back, you'll get Sarah's and her mom's front. Hey. Sarah and I had a conversation, and during our first meeting together in my office back here, Sarah let me know about her eye contact, which is different from many other people's. And so reflecting on that conversation, I admire that you knew the importance of educating somebody like me, Sarah, and about talking about your neurodivergence is how you label this.
Yes.
So can you start our conversation by talking about eye contact and how that makes you different and why that makes you different?
First off, eye contact for me is something that, although I've had several years of intervention and training in order to actually make eye contact, it's very difficult for me to do, and it's something that exhausts me if I do it for too much or too long of a time. So I usually prefer to just look in someone's general direction when I'm speaking with them. Like right now, I'm sort of looking above everyone's heads. I'm currently looking in the corner of the wooden arch beam, and I'm looking at the sparkly ceiling because it's just catching my eye and it just makes me feel comfortable. So I'll look down at faces from time to time, but I'll just sort of bounce between the two of them. So that just makes me feel a little less exposed, a little protected. So that's that.
So if you were to look at the faces and the colors on people's clothing and things like that,
Yeah.
what happens inside?
Yeah, so it's a very I feel like people are like looking right at me, and it's like it's a little bit anxiety inducing. So I'll especially like if I don't know someone very well, or a bunch of different factors. If I look at somebody directly, it gets my ears are right now are starting to get hot. I have a little flutter reaction in my solar plexus, and like trying to control that just by sort of bouncing back and forth. So those are like the physical reactions I have. It's also just emotionally and mentally it's like my anxiety heightens a little bit, and my first instinct is to just try to look at something else and just try to balance my energy and just sort of calm down by looking at something else.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, I think it's important to point out that you're obviously a performer. You sing in front of hundreds, if not thousands, of people. So it's not that you're anxious about being in front of people.
No. It's just how my brain processes information, because usually there's so much information that my brain and my eyes and my body is taking it all at once. Like if I look at somebody directly, it's so overstimulating sometimes. Like my brain just naturally just looks at that one point in the room, and because it's less information that my brain has to take in.
Yeah.
So
Tracy?
I'd actually like to point out that most people on the autism spectrum have the complete opposite response to eye contact than a typically developing person. So, for example, I'm looking at you and I'm making eye contact, and that makes me feel comfortable because I feel like, hey, we get each other and we understand. Well, somebody on the autism spectrum has a complete opposite reaction of that. And there's been a lot of studies done about face recognition when they're babies and younger than a year. So that's actually how I found out that Sarah was on the autism spectrum, is my mom actually said, she doesn't recognize me.
No.
And very young age, like less than a year old. And so we started kind of doing a lot of research and talking to her doctor, and she was diagnosed at age 2 because we knew something was wrong, but we didn't know what it was. So I had in high school a friend who had a brother with autism, but it was a more classic presentation back in the 80s. He was nonverbal, he didn't communicate at all with anyone. So I just had that very narrow experience of my life, and I was like, oh, she can't have autism, she doesn't have that.
Right.
And over the years we've been educated that it is a spectrum disorder, and it can present very young, very subtly, and I don't think if my mother hadn't said anything to me at that point, I don't think she would have been diagnosed that early.
No.
When she was diagnosed, my son was a baby, like 2 months old, and the doctor was like, oh, don't worry, it's not genetic, it doesn't run in families, blah, blah, blah. Okay, this was 21 years ago. Now they found out that it does sometimes run in families. We didn't seem concerned about my son at age 2 months, but by the time he was 9 months old, I knew he was on the spectrum too. So he was also diagnosed at age 2. The early diagnosis was imperative, especially getting them early intervention services, speech therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy, any kind of special ed.
Yes.
That started when they were 2 years old and continued till today.
Yeah, pretty much.
Now it's more, seeing therapists and doing things that they've learned over the school years, but it's interesting that you started with eye contact because that's sort of what got the ball rolling for us.
Yeah.
Knowing that they were a little bit different. than typically developing kids.
Yeah, it's fascinating because as a new mom, everything is new. So
Yeah,
how a
and
baby responds
she's
to
my
you.
oldest, so
Yeah.
I didn't know that girls could even have autism at that time. 21 years ago is a different story,
Yes.
as I mentioned. So it's really been an educational journey for all of us, but
Yeah.
Yep.
it's interesting.
Yes. So Sarah, can you talk a little bit about what the diagnosis meant for you?
Yeah, definitely. I was informed of my diagnosis in middle school, and it totally rocked my world. And it also just was very informative for me because, like, a lot of like my early childhood, like I could tell that I did not fit the neurotypical mold, meaning like a normally developed person's perspective, and you know, it sort of transformed into the narrative of something must be wrong with me. Something must be wrong because, you know, I'm taking all these therapies to just try to fit in, and even when I'm getting my speech therapy and all of these things, like I still have something that I'm lacking. And when I got that diagnosis, like, no, this is just me. I am just who I am, and that doesn't mean that I'm lacking or broken or anything of the sort, although it took several years for me to actually ingrain that into my mind and say, I'm not broken, I'm not deficient, I'm not lacking anything. This is just my brain's makeup. So that did a world of difference for me, but it took several years for me to really accept that about myself and to really process that this is me. You know, I like after a few years after my diagnosis, I was still like trying to fit in and trying to put myself into a world and a perspective that just didn't fit for me because that's just how my brain is made up. So, you know, it was a lot of years of, you know, trying to fit in, even though I knew I had this diagnosis, like I was still trying to make it work, and yeah.
So I wanted to point out, when she says she received her diagnosis, that was the time that she was made aware that she had this diagnosis. She obviously got the diagnosis when she was a baby. And she did have a lot of therapies
Yeah.
throughout her childhood. And the idea behind those therapies is just to make the child more, I guess the word functional would be the best word. It's not necessarily to make them into somebody that they're not, but they need skills, and they need to be taught skills that a typically developing person just picks up. Just, you know, generally speaking, you learn what's socially acceptable. You know, your parents might guide you, or your church or your mentors might guide you into that, you know, what's socially acceptable in your culture or your group of people. But people with autism, they really struggle with that.
Yes.
So the idea behind the therapy is communication. We needed to teach them how to talk,
Yes.
how to have a conversation. I mean, there were times where we would count verbal exchanges. Like,
Yep.
I say something, you respond. I say something, you respond. Oh, good job, Sarah, you did 4 times. You know, and those types of things need to be taught to people on the spectrum. So that was the idea behind all of the different therapies, generally. So when she received the diagnosis, and to her was when we told her
Yes.
that you have autism and this is what that means. We kind of skirted around the issue a little bit when
Yeah.
she was younger, but you sort of have to tread carefully because you don't want them to feel like they're different, even though they already feel like they're different.
Yes.
So that was kind of a thin line to tread as to when do you put a label on what they're feeling. So that was a difficult time
Yes.
for all of us,
Yeah.
for her to accept that she is a little bit different. Now my son, on the other hand,
Yeah.
he was told around the same time when he was in middle school, and we told him what that meant, and he was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
He's never had any desire to fit in to
No.
a mold of others'
No.
design, and doesn't bother him at all.
Nope.
So it's a spectrum of response. And what the diagnosis means to each person. But they both come to accept that they have this diagnosis that most people would consider a disorder. But it comes with a lot of gifts as well.
Yes.
Terrific. So maybe we'll circle back to those gifts. So Sarah, we talked about the term dysregulated, something
yes.
that I didn't know about. Could you talk what that looks to us about what that looks like or feels like?
Sure. I can point to an exact day last week I was feeling dysregulated. That was Friday.
Yes,
Friday
were.
was really rough for me.
Yeah.
So I went into work and I immediately, I woke up in the morning, I'm like, I am completely exhausted. I got sleep, it was not restful at all. I'm already feeling just really dragged down, really low energy, and I could tell that my sensory battery was really low. And so I went throughout that day of work and all of my sentences were really heightened, everything felt so much louder than usual. My eyes were struggling to keep open because I was so overwhelmed, and also so tired, I could barely keep my eyes open. I was just the world is just so much right now. And I was just feeling really out of sorts, and also just my brain could just shut off at any moment, because you sort of have to think of it as a leaky bucket, or a sponge. My brain is a sponge, and I woke up and it was already full. And I was going about my day and there was still water trying to shove into the sponge, and it didn't work very well. So the way I sort of resolved that, yesterday I slept most of the day, and I ate foods that are my safe foods, that that are not threatening to me sensory-wise. Spent some time just vegging out and just playing on the computer, just very introverted things. So that was Friday. It was not pleasant. Yeah. So that term of dysregulated for me is when I'm my senses are just so overwhelmed and my body is in overdrive because of how much fight or flight I have in my body, because of how much sensory information I'm taking in. It's all too much.
Yes. Yes.
So that's interesting to point out that most people think that people with autism have social and communication issues primarily, but there are also a lot of sensory dysfunction that goes on the spectrum, both from a touch response, auditory sensitivities, anxiety goes hand in hand very, very much with people on the spectrum. So there's a lot of just the way they experience the world, as how they process sensory input is completely different than how you or I might do it. And when she says she's dysregulated, it's just too much sensory intake for them to process at a time. It can be a wide range, and it can be completely opposite ends of the spectrum, just like Sarah is undersensitive to physical pain. So she went trick-or-treating one year, she fell off the sidewalk, she broke her ankle. Mom,
Walked it off.
I kind of hurt my ankle, whatever. Next morning she wakes up, it's humongous, it's broken. Okay. But my son is a complete opposite. Getting a blood draw for him is like somebody's cutting his arm off.
He had fillings in his
screaming in pain and agony you would not believe. So if you're ever at the place to get your blood drawn and there's some kid screaming, it's probably
Kyle.
So the dysregulation and the sensory thing is a big piece that is often overlooked to people on the spectrum, that they're not trying to be difficult.
No.
They're not trying to be bad or defiant or whatever. A lot of the time when they are really yelling or screaming or having a meltdown, there's usually a reason for it. And it might not be, I wanted a candy bar and mom wouldn't buy me one. Maybe it's these lights are really bright in Wegmans.
And they're making a noise.
And they're making a noise that nobody else can hear. And there's a lot of people in here that I don't know that are looking at me, and it's hot. and I have a stone in my shoe, and
Oh.
all sorts of things
Yeah.
are contributing that most people would just be able to laugh off or not even notice.
Right.
So it's been very educational for me to realize that people's behaviors are not always as obvious as you would think.
Yeah, thank you. Because we're in a worship setting, I just want to turn here. And so, Sarah, we talked about how you move through worship, which I thought was interesting, the concept of mapping or mentally mapping. So in terms
Yeah.
of how you make sense of being in a space like this,
Sure.
could you be helpful there?
Yeah, so oftentimes I go into the sanctuary here, and at the beginning we have the hymn sing, and that's a very like external communication because we're all singing communally together. So that is a more outward focus for me of like where I have to shift my energy and shift my focus. And also during the anthem and during the children's time, it's a very external mode of communication for me. And then it goes inward, it becomes an inward sense of perspective and listening and communication when the sermon is being orated, and during the community prayer time and the Lord's Prayer. Those are all inward things I can sort of check in with my body and see, and to hear the word and to meditate on the prayers and lessons that we learn each week. And also the communion time is a very inward experience for me. And then that comes out again when we do the final sing and the church announcements and the postlude. Those are all, so in like my musical mind, it's like a decrescendo and then a crescendo.
Yeah. All right, thank you.
And this is like this idea of mental mapping is sort of like another big thing of just life with autism. It's like, you know, we need to feel like we have control of what's going on around us. So with the way that, at least for me, that I do that is just like, you know, mentally mapping, like, you know, how I'm supposed to interact and what I'm expected to do based on like what I'm given, like in the church bulletin. I can sort of look and be like, okay, I'm gonna do this here, this there, this there, and you know, sort of plan that out.
Yeah, so I learned that when I change things up during worship, for somebody that mentally maps, it makes it challenging. So thanks for letting me know that.
Yeah.
Any kind of change to the routine is very disruptive to somebody with autism because the mental mapping, it's kind of a new term, but it allows them to kind of structure their day. And when
Yes.
they stay in that lane, everything's good. But if people
Ideally.
change things up, it kind of throws them for a loop.
Yeah.
So when Sarah was in elementary school, maybe it was middle school, it was 4th or 5th grade,
Yeah.
she had a boy in her class that was always obnoxious.
Yes.
Okay, and she would come home and she'd be like, oh my God, he's so annoying, like, he keeps poking my bubble and popping my bubble. I go, what do you mean? Well, he's always bothering me, and then I have to spend all this time creating this mental safe zone around myself. And then he'd just go and do something else, and it would pop, and then I have to do it over and over again throughout the whole class. Now, she was probably 10 years old
Yep.
when she was able to verbalize that that's what she was doing. She was kind of mentally mapping, creating this zone around her own thoughts, and he would just keep popping her bubble. Now, of course, people do that on real life all the time,
Yes.
everybody, right?
Yes.
But it was really intuitive that she said that at that young age. So mental mapping is basically just a coping mechanism that you use to try to get through the day in
Yeah.
a socially acceptable manner.
Terrific. Well, here's my last question, then it's directed first at you, Tracy, or towards you, Tracy. So as a mother of 2 people on the autism spectrum disorder, how have you learned how to be your best mom, to be your best self?
She's a great mom, by the way.
Yeah, I've heard that. And who helped, or what helped, and what didn't help?
Well, I'm kind of uncomfortable when people ask that because I really feel like I didn't really have a choice. It's not like I chose to be a good mom or a bad mom. I mean, obviously everybody wants to be the best parent that they can be, most people. And I think the thing that helped was letting go of expectations. So very early on, I had a hard time when my friends' kids would be reaching milestones at certain times and mine weren't.
Yeah.
And that was hard, to not compare yourself to other people or their children or whatever. So letting go of some of that was helpful to me, and I was just like, okay, well, they have a developmental delay. That doesn't mean that they're never going to be able to accomplish anything. It just might take longer, and a little bit of a rougher road. As far as who helped, we're very fortunate here in Monroe County to have strong hospital. We've gotten hooked up with a lot of very good doctors, a lot of good therapists, and then our school system here is incredibly supportive. Great teachers, particularly in elementary school. Great support from the school district, giving whatever services we needed. We didn't have to pay for any of that. It was all covered by the school district. Sarah actually went to Norman Howard School for high school, which was also covered by the school district. So they were always very supportive. Whatever the kids needed, they were able to provide for them. Family support, we had a little. A lot of sacrificing on mine and my husband's part to provide what they needed. It's been a journey.
Yes.
But I have to say, when they were little, I never would have thought that they would both be in their 20s and working. Honestly,
Yeah.
like, I honestly thought that was my goal. Like,
Yes.
I want them to be able to get to the point in their lives where they can contribute and support themselves. So we're still working a little bit on the support themselves part.
Yeah.
But it's been really incredible, from somebody that didn't talk until they were 3 years old to what she is now.
And we love what she is now, so thank you.
I do too.
Let's end there. So thank you so much, both of you, for sharing with us your lives and your experience. Hopefully we will become a more compassionate community.